Welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, helping you to prepare to take the PMP exam with your host, Cornelius Fichtner.
Hello and welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, where we will not bore you to tears as you prepare for the PMP exam. At least I hope so. I am your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner. This is part 2 of Estimate Activity Durations. In part 1 we did a general overview of the process and introduced you to the inputs. Now let's move forward with tools and techniques as well as outputs. But first, here are the learning goals. At the end of this episode, you will be able to explain why we use analogous estimating, define factors that influence the precision of parametric estimating. You can describe 3-point estimates, you will be able to name the PERT formula, and explain why we give estimation ranges. Because this is part 2, we will not be doing our usual review of the project time management knowledge area and the individual processes. Instead, we move right on to the tools and techniques of estimate activity durations. And here they are. They are the expert judgment, analogous estimating, parametric estimating, 3-point estimates, and finally the reserve analysis. Let's repeat what we said in the opening of part 1. The experts are supposed to estimate the duration of our activities. So it's not surprising that expert judgment is the first tool and technique in this process. And there are several reasons for this. First of all, many projects are complex and require the cooperation of many disciplines. You as the project manager cannot have the necessary experience to estimate everything. You may have a certain expertise and you should give your input in these particular areas. But how much do you know about underwater welding? Not much? Then go ahead and let the experts do the estimates. Second, the estimates have years of experience. An uncle of mine in Switzerland is an experienced architect. He told me a story about when they had to estimate the size of a building. He made a guess about the square meters, and later on it turned out that he had been within about 5% of the total square meters. In another project, my lead software developer told me after the first meeting with the customer that he thinks that this project would take about 3 months of pure development time, and he was spot on, almost. We had it done after 11 weeks. Experts, they can fall back on their know-how, their experience, and also their gut feeling. But such gut feeling estimates seem very haphazard and not really following a process. That's why you should not really rely on them, because there isn't a formula. As a response, we use 3 kinds of estimating techniques that follow clearly defined rules, and they are the analogous estimating, the parametric estimating, and finally also the 3-point estimates. Here is the definition of analogous estimating. It is defined as an estimating technique that uses the values of parameters such as scope, cost, budget, and duration, or measures of scale such as size, weight, complexity from a previous similar activity as the basis for estimating the same parameter or measure for a future activity. Let's take a look at what this really means. Analogous estimating means that you use the actual time frame from a previous similar project as the basis for estimating the time frame of the current project. Analogous estimating is used when you have little information that is known about the current project, or when the two projects look similar. Of course, if they only appear similar, but in fact they are not similar, then your estimate will, of course, be inaccurate. On the positive side, Analogous estimating is fast and it doesn't cost much. On the other side, it is good for ballpark figures, but it is not well suited for precise estimation of projects or timeline development. In our earlier example, my software developer, he had done a similar project in the past, and he had applied that experience to the new project and estimated 3 months. The underlying premise is that this new project is analogous to that previous project, and of course analogous means that it's similar. Because we know how long the previous project took, we can estimate how long this new project here will take as well. Here is the definition of parametric estimating. This is an estimating technique that uses a statistical relationship between historical data and other variables to calculate an estimate for activity parameters, such as scope, cost, budget, and duration. An example for the cost parameter is multiplying the planned quantity of work to be performed by the historical cost per unit to obtain the estimated cost. Let's take a look at what this really means. Parametric modeling, parametric estimating, involves using variables from your project description. And then you apply these into a mathematical formula, and from this mathematical formula you can develop an estimate. It's as simple as that. For example, how long does it take to lay down 5 kilometers of railroad tracks? That is simple. If you know the number of rails that will be involved and how long it takes to lay one rail, you can estimate the amount of time it takes to lay the 5 kilometers. The formula is also simple. The number of units multiplied by the amount of time each unit takes to create equals the total amount of the effort needed for the development. Let me add at this point that the accuracy of parametric estimating can vary widely. It gets more and more accurate if you have the following 3 factors in place. First of all, we have accurate historical data. Then we have parameters in the model that are actually quantifiable, and we have a scalable model that works well on small as well as on large projects. When we talk about actually quantifiable, we mean something like this: the total number of square meters multiplied by the cost per square meter. That works quite well. But the measure lines of code in software development is a little bit more difficult to quantify. What do you multiply that with? Do you multiply that with the hourly rate of your developers, or how many lines of code they can write per hour? However, software function points, that may give you a much higher accuracy again. Here is the definition of the 3-point estimates. This is an analytical technique that uses 3 cost or duration estimates to represent the optimistic, most likely, and pessimistic scenarios. This technique is applied to improve the accuracy of the estimates of cost or duration when the underlying activity or cost component is uncertain. And let's once again take a look at what this really means. 3-point estimates, they take uncertainties into consideration. Often your experts will tell you, I don't really know how long it will take. So go ahead and ask them 3 questions. Ask them, how long will this take if you are optimistic? How long will this most likely take? And how long will this take if you are pessimistic? And that way you take these uncertainties into consideration. These 3-point estimating techniques, they are also referred to as PERT, Program Evaluation and Review Technique. It makes sense in the real world that you don't really know how long a particular activity will take, especially talking about certain activities such as research or development, and by having an optimistic, most likely and pessimistic estimate, we can now get a weighted average. As a project manager, you can use these 3-point PERT estimating techniques to gain a greater degree of control over how the end value is calculated. And the end value is, of course, this weighted average that I mentioned of these 3 estimates. And here is the formula of how you would calculate PERT. You add up your pessimistic 4 times the most likely as well as the optimistic estimate, and then you divide these by 6. This gives you an estimate that is much more balanced. However, now that you know this particular formula, I would like to introduce you to another form of duration estimation, as it has been immortalized in the following project management saying. It goes like this. To estimate a project, work out how long it would take one person to do it, and then multiply that by the number of people on the project. It's certainly an alternative approach of doing it, but please don't select this as an answer on your PMP exam. Okay, so now we have all these estimates. What do you do now? I can tell you what I would do. I would put in a reserve. I would analyze my estimates and I would figure out, well, who estimated it? Who is going to perform the task? How complex is the task? Etc. And based on that, I usually put in a percentage of the estimate. Maybe I'll add 10%. Maybe in your company you add fixed hours so that you will add a 2-day reserve to every task that takes 3 weeks. This reserve will either be used up during the project or it will be eliminated. We are moving on to the 2 outputs of estimate activity duration. They are the activity duration estimates and the project document updates. When it comes to the activity duration estimates, let me give you an example. Your boss comes to you and shows you a preliminary scope and asks, how long will this type of project take? You'll look at it and you will think to yourself, this should take about 2 months. But to your boss, you will say, this will take about 6 to 10 weeks. This is what we call a range. You always give a range because we never, ever give an estimate that is just one number. Yes, you could have told your boss, also, this will take 2 months plus minus about 20%. This would also be a range. And the reason why we never give a single number is this. If you tell your supervisor that this will take exactly 2 months, then this is the number that he or she will remember, and it's also the number that you will be held responsible to. And it doesn't even matter that this was just a friendly conversation over a cup of coffee. You said 2 months, I heard 2 months, and therefore it's going to take 2 months. That's why we always give a range when we estimate. Alright, so we now have a lot of additional information available to us after we have estimated these activity durations. So where would you document all of this information? Of course, the answer is you document this in your activity attributes. Here you document the duration estimates for each of your schedule activities. You also document all the assumptions that you have made. And don't forget, you have made contingencies, you have made reserves, and therefore you will also document those in your activity attributes. Before we move on, please remember what was said earlier about doing all of these processes in project time management as one big blob. For instance, most people will use a project management scheduling software to manage their activity list. So the duration ranges and contingency is added into this tool. And usually, as I do this, I personally have a hard time not to go ahead and also define the predecessors and successors at the same time, because it's so obvious that I first have to mix the concrete, takes 2 hours, then I have to pour the concrete, that takes 1 hour, and then I have to let it cure, which takes 2 days. But doing all of that is not part of estimate activity durations. That's why we don't look at this as one big blob. It's part of our next process, develop schedule. And we look at these things as separate processes because we have different tools and techniques in each, and different skills are required of us as project managers as we execute these processes. So, what types of questions do we see in sample tests online or in books? First of all, this process has a lot of inputs, so know them, especially that we need the risk register and the activity cost estimates, which are part of the project management plan. But a favorite question target here for this process are the 3 estimation techniques that we just have looked at in detail. Do you still remember them? Go ahead. Alright, they are the analogous estimating, the parametric estimating, and the 3-point estimating, also known as PERT. Please make a mental note that the bottom-up estimating technique is not a tool and technique of this process, even though it is pretty much what we're doing. We're estimating the duration of all our detailed schedule activities from the bottom up, but it's not explicitly listed as a tool and technique. You will very likely come across a number of questions that are going to ask you to calculate the durations of activities based on resources and their level of productivity. The answer to this type of question is very much dependent on the context of the question and the parameters that are given to you. For example, what is the duration of a 20-hour activity that has 2 resources assigned which are both 100% productive? Now, this is a simple calculation that you can do in your head. 20 hours, 2 people, both work 100%, 20 divided by 2 is, well, it's obviously 10 hours. Now, you need to also be able to see that if it says, well, what if they're only 50% productive? Well, then it will obviously take 20 hours because these 2 people only work at a 50% production rate, and therefore it would double the number of hours that we calculated in the first example there. It's that simple. You need to be prepared to take these kind of parameters into account when it comes to estimating durations. You need to be thinking through them, and you need to be calculating them correctly. And you also have to be aware of possible trick questions, like this one right here. What is the duration of a 20-hour activity that has 2 resources assigned that are 100% productive and are willing to work 2 hours of overtime? This also is something that you can do in your head, because you take the 20 hours of these 2 resources that are 100% productive and you divide it by 2, and you will end up with the answer of 10 hours. The 2 hours of overtime here, they have nothing to do with the duration. It takes 20 hours of actual time of executing this particular task. It doesn't matter whether this is regular time or overtime. It'll take them 10 hours, period. Let's review. In the estimate activity durations process, you take your schedule activities and all your influencing factors, and you ask your specialists the question, how long does this take? Your specialists will use their expert judgment, and by using analogous estimating, parametric estimating, or 3-point estimating, they will give you a duration for each activity. You can then decide to add certain reserves on top of that, and you will document these estimates in the activity attributes. And very important, each estimate is a range, like it takes 3 weeks plus minus 10% to finish the preliminary design. And this concludes our overview of estimate activity durations. But before we go, here is another exam tip for you, and this one is in regards to building your study plan. Begin with a self-assessment and estimate how long it will take you to study properly for the exam. If you feel that it'll take you 10 to 12 weeks to prepare, notice we've given an estimation range here, 10 to 12 weeks, then go ahead and schedule your exam for about 12 weeks from today. Now you can go ahead and you can create your study plan around this duration. And once you know the date of your exam, you will be much more focused on this. I always tell people to create their own study plan, but if you don't have a study plan, or if you don't want to take the time to create one, and if you just simply want to rely on our best practices, then go ahead and take a look at www.pmstudyplan.com, where we offer a ready-made PMP exam study plan for sale. Until next time.